I married Sarah, hoping to build a family. But when her son faced a crucial test, her loyalty twisted into a dagger. You're not his father, she sneered, erasing years of commitment. My silence spoke volumes. She couldn't have imagined the family reckoning that was coming. This is my story. Like, share, and tell us where you're listening from. The air in the living room was thick with unspoken words, heavier than the summer humidity pressing against the windows. Ethan watched Sarah, her back to him, as she stared out at the garden. Her shoulders were rigid, a silent barrier he knew all too well. He took a deep breath, the scent of her lavender candle doing little to soothe his rising frustration. Sarah, he began, his voice carefully level. We need to talk about Leo. This can't go on. She turned slowly, her eyes, usually warm and inviting, now held a cold, defensive glint he found increasingly unsettling. What is there to talk about, Ethan? I'm handling it. Her tone was dismissive, a familiar refrain that grated on his nerves. For 20 years, Ethan had navigated the grimy underbelly of the city, sifting through crime scenes, interrogating hardened criminals, and bringing justice to victims. He'd seen it all: betrayal, violence, human depravity. But nothing, absolutely nothing, in his 2 decades as a detective had prepared him for the treacherous landscape of domestic conflict, particularly when it involved his new stepson. The rules of engagement were different here. The emotional stakes far higher, the lines of right and wrong blurred by a mother's fierce, often misguided, protectiveness. He'd faced down armed suspects with less trepidation than he now felt confronting his own wife about her son. Handling it, Ethan countered, stepping closer. By sweeping it under the rug, by letting him believe there are no consequences for his actions. His voice hardened, the detective in him refusing to back down from what he saw as a clear moral imperative. Sarah bristled, her chin jutting out. He's my son, Ethan, and I know what's best for him. The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. My son. Not our son, not the son, my son. It was a subtle but devastating distinction. A casual erasure of the 3 years they had built together. The marriage vows, the shared dreams of a blended family. It was a wall suddenly erected between them, fortified by her biological claim and his outsider status. The roots of this argument stretched back 3 weeks to a Tuesday afternoon when Ethan had received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Mr. Albright, the owner of Albright's Hardware, a local institution with dusty shelves and a reputation for knowing everyone's business. Mr. Albright's voice, usually jovial, had been tight with concern. Detective Miller, he'd said, I know you're no longer on active duty, but I think you need to see something. It concerns young Leo. A cold knot had formed in Ethan's stomach, a premonition of trouble. Mr. Albright had mentioned security footage, something about a significant amount of merchandise. Ethan had driven straight to the store, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. Mr. Albright led him to a small office and played the video. The grainy footage painted a damning picture. Leo, his face a mixture of bravado and nervous excitement, moving through the aisles with 2 other boys. Ethan recognized them from school photos Sarah kept on the fridge. Owen Montgomery and Caleb Thorne, sons of some of the town's most influential families. They moved with a practiced ease, stuffing tools, spray paint, and a handful of expensive electronic gadgets into their backpacks. The total tally, according to Mr. Albright, was just shy of $800. Ethan felt a familiar surge of anger mixed with a deeper, more personal disappointment. He hadn't waited, he'd gone straight home. The USB drive clutched in his hand. Sarah was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and Leo was sprawled on the couch, engrossed in his phone. Ethan had walked in, the silence that followed his entrance heavy with his unspoken accusation. He'd connected the USB to the TV. The living room suddenly bathed in the harsh, unflattering glow of the security footage. Leo's head snapped up, his eyes widening in alarm as he recognized himself on screen. His complexion paled, and he stammered, What is this? That's not me. It's doctored." Sarah, initially confused, had stared at the screen, then at Ethan, then back at the image of her son methodically stealing. A flicker of disbelief, then a wave of defensiveness washed over her face. Before Ethan could even begin to explain, Sarah was already moving. She stepped in front of Leo, a human shield, blocking Ethan's view of his stepson. "Ethan, this isn't how we do things," she said, her voice strained, a thinly veiled warning. "This is a family matter. Let's talk about it privately, please." Her hand was on Leo's shoulder, a possessive gesture that irked Ethan. He could see the fear in Leo's eyes, yes, but also a hint of relief, knowing his mother was already intervening. Ethan ignored her plea. "Privately? Sarah, he committed a crime. He needs to face what he's done. He needs to go back to Mr. Albright, look him in the eye, apologize, and pay for every single item he took." He pointed at the screen where Leo's face was still frozen in the act of slipping a wrench into his bag. "That's how you learn responsibility. That's how you make amends." Cornered, Leo finally broke. His bravado crumbled, replaced by shame and resentment. "It wasn't my idea," he mumbled, looking at his shoes. "Owen and Caleb, they dared me. They said it would be fun. Everyone does it." He looked up, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Their dads are Mr. Montgomery, the lawyer, and Mr. Thorne, who owns the dealership. They're really important." The names hung in the air, unspoken threats, implying a level of influence that could make problems disappear. Sarah's head snapped to Ethan. She gripped his arm, pulling him into the hallway, her whisper urgent and laced with panic. "Ethan, did you hear him? Owen and Caleb. Their parents are huge donors at Westfield Academy. Mr. Montgomery is on the board. If this gets out, if Leo gets in trouble, it could reflect badly on me. My job, Ethan, my position at the school, it's all on the line." She taught English there, a job she cherished, and one that provided a significant portion of their household income. The unspoken implication was clear. Her career was more important than Leo facing the consequences of his actions. Ethan stared at her, utterly appalled. "So that's it? Because their parents are important, Leo gets a pass? This is the real world you want him to understand? That if you have powerful friends, you can get away with anything?" His voice was low, dangerous. He couldn't believe she was prioritizing her job and their social standing over teaching Leo a fundamental lesson about integrity and accountability. It was a twisted form of protection, one that would ultimately harm Leo more than help him. Sarah pulled away, her face hardening into a mask of defiance. "You just don't understand, Ethan. You don't have kids of your own. You don't know what it's like." Her eyes narrowed, and then she delivered the blow that shattered something inside him. "You're not his father." The words were a physical punch to the gut. They echoed in the quiet hallway, each syllable a poisoned dart. He had tried so hard for 3 years to be a good stepfather, to offer guidance, stability, a male role model Leo had lacked since his biological father, Robert, had moved halfway across the country. He had poured his heart into this new family, and with those 5 words, she had dismissed it all, reduced him to an irrelevant outsider. "No, I'm not his biological father," Ethan said, his voice raw with hurt. "But I've been here. I've been present. While Robert sent lavish gifts and occasional checks, I've tried to teach him right from wrong. Robert's version of parenting is throwing money at problems. Mine is about instilling values, teaching responsibility." He gestured back towards the living room where Leo sat, still visibly shaken. "This is not about money, Sarah. This is about character." "Character?" Sarah scoffed, her fear morphing into anger. "Do you know what a shoplifting charge would do to his college applications? His entire future could be ruined. A police record at 17? It would follow him forever." She wrung her hands. "There has to be another way. We can just pay Mr. Albright back discreetly. No fuss, no police, no involvement from the Montgomerys or Thorns. It never has to leave this house." She was already formulating a plan to bury the problem, not solve it. Ethan looked at her, truly looked at her, and the fight drained out of him, replaced by a cold, heavy weariness. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the defensive glint in her eyes, the complete conviction that her way was the only way. He realized with a sickening certainty that she had already made up her mind. He could argue until his voice was hoarse, present every logical, ethical, or moral argument, and it wouldn't make a difference. Sarah would handle things her way, protecting her son from what she perceived as the greater threat, even if it meant sacrificing the very principles Ethan believed in. The battle wasn't just about Leo anymore. It was about the foundation of their marriage, And Ethan knew with a sinking heart he was already losing. The first rays of morning sunlight barely pierced the blinds when Ethan slipped out of bed. Sarah was still asleep, her breathing even and soft. He dressed quickly, the silence of the house amplifying the unresolved tension from the night before. His mind was clear, however. Despite Sarah's passionate objections and hurtful words, he intended to follow through. He would go to his early call and then, without fail, he would take Leo to Mr. Albright's store. Leo would apologize, face the man he'd wronged, and then they would figure out a way to pay for the stolen items. That was the only path to true amends, the only way for Leo to learn. He left a note on the kitchen counter, brief and to the point. Back by noon, we're taking Leo to Albright's. He hoped she would see it not as a challenge, but as a commitment to their shared future, to Leo's future. He returned just before noon, the city noise fading as he pulled into their driveway. As he opened the front door, the scent of fresh coffee and a triumphant smile from Sarah greeted him. She stood in the entryway, her hands on her hips, a self-satisfied glint in her eyes. Ethan, she announced, her voice bright and cheerful. You don't have to worry. It's all taken care of. A cold, heavy feeling settled deep in Ethan's stomach, twisting into a knot of dread. He knew immediately. The note, his carefully laid plan, his firm resolve, all of it had been disregarded. Sarah had gone behind his back. The betrayal was a bitter taste in his mouth, confirming his worst fears from the previous evening. He had hoped, against all rational thought, that she might have reconsidered, that his resolve might have swayed her. He had been wrong. What do you mean, taken care of, Ethan asked, his voice low, a controlled calmness masking the storm brewing within him. He watched her, his detective instincts sharpening, picking up on the subtle tells in her posture, the slight lift of her chin, the way her eyes avoided his direct gaze for just a fraction of a second. Sarah's smile widened, oblivious to the icy anger radiating from him. I called Lieutenant Miller, she explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He's an old friend from the force, and you know he's always at the Westfield Academy fundraisers. He understands these things. She paused, expecting, Ethan assumed, some form of admiration for her ingenuity. He understood the situation perfectly. He spoke with Mr. Albright this morning. Apparently, Mr. Albright was willing to be very understanding once he knew who was calling. She shrugged lightly, a casual gesture that made Ethan's blood run cold. The charges are gone. Poof, like they never happened. Ethan stared at her, utterly aghast. You called my former colleague? You used our connection, my old badge, to make shoplifting charges disappear? Sarah, that's not taking care of it. That's sweeping it under the rug. That's telling Leo that if you have the right connections, you can get away with anything. His voice rose, the controlled calmness giving way to raw frustration. Sarah's dismissive wave of her hand cut him off. Oh, Ethan, please, don't be so dramatic. He's 17, not a hardened criminal. We protected his future. That's what a family does. She moved towards the kitchen, already putting distance between them, creating a physical barrier to the argument she clearly didn't want to have. Ignoring her, Ethan went straight to Leo's room. He found his stepson sprawled on his bed, earbuds in, absorbed in a video game. Leo looked up, startled, then a wide, confident grin spread across his face. The fear and shame that had clouded his features the previous night were completely gone, replaced by an unsettling nonchalance. Hey, Ethan, Leo said, pulling out an earbud. Mom said you'd probably be back soon. Everything's cool, by the way. Mom's friend made it all go away. His tone was casual, as if he were discussing a canceled school assignment, not a criminal act. There was no remorse, no understanding of the gravity of what he had done, only relief and a touch of smugness. A fresh wave of nausea washed over Ethan. Made what go away, Leo? He asked, though he already knew the answer. He needed to hear it from Leo to understand the lesson his stepson had truly internalized. Leo shrugged, pushing himself up to a sitting position. The store thing. Mom said it was just a misunderstanding and she got it handled. Said Lieutenant Miller was cool about it. Mom says people like us look out for each other, you know? Like with connections and stuff, you don't have to worry about the little things. He punctuated his statement with a confident nod, a knowing look in his eyes. Ethan felt a profound sickness churn in his gut. People like us. That phrase, delivered with such innocent arrogance, hammered home the truly dangerous lesson Sarah had just imparted. She wasn't teaching Leo about justice, about amends, about responsibility. She was teaching him about impunity, about leveraging privilege, about the corrupting power of connections. She was telling him that the rules didn't apply to people like us. His vision of a moral compass, of guiding Leo on towards integrity, had been shattered. He left Leo's room, the boy's cheerful indifference a lead weight in his chest. Downstairs, Sarah was humming softly as she chopped vegetables for dinner, a picture of domestic bliss, completely oblivious to the turmoil she had unleashed within him. "See?" she said, turning to him with another bright smile. "Everything's fine. I told you I'd handle it. I protected our family." "Protected our family?" Ethan retorted, his voice tight with barely contained fury. "You protected Leo from facing the consequences of his actions. You sent him a message that rules are for other people, not for those who have the right phone number to call." Sarah threw down her knife, her face suddenly flushed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Ethan. It's not that black and white. There are gray areas in life. Sometimes you have to navigate those gray areas to protect the ones you love. Family protects each other, no matter what." Her stance was rigid, unyielding, as if family protection justified anything. "Family helps each other become better, Sarah," Ethan argued, trying to keep his voice steady. "Not avoid responsibility, not learn that they can simply make their problems disappear with a phone call. What kind of lesson is that for a young man?" She threw her hands up in exasperation. "Your moralizing is so tiresome, Ethan. It's fine for your old detective work, for criminals, but this is Leo, our son. This is the real world, not some police procedural. We did what was necessary." She turned back to her vegetables, dismissing his concerns as naive and irrelevant. But Ethan couldn't dismiss it. He couldn't shake the image of Leo's confident, almost arrogant smile. The ease with which he had accepted that mom's friend made it go away. The belief that people like us operated above the law. It was a poison seeping into Leo's character, and Sarah had willingly administered it. The gulf between Ethan's unwavering principles and Sarah's self-serving pragmatism had not just widened, it had become a chasm, deep and frighteningly impassable. A week later, the uneasy truce in Ethan and Sarah's home was shattered by the shrill ring of the phone. Ethan was in the study, trying to focus on a cold case file from his old days, but his concentration had been fractured ever since the Albright incident. He picked up, and the voice on the other end was Principal Harrison's, firm, professional, and unmistakably grim. "Mr. Miller," Principal Harrison began without preamble, "I'm calling about an incident involving Leo, and unfortunately Owen Montgomery and Caleb Thorne." Ethan felt an immediate tightening in his chest. "What happened, Principal?" he asked, his mind already bracing for the worst. The names of those two boys were now irrevocably linked to trouble. The principal sighed heavily. "This morning, during a routine locker inspection, school officials found a significant quantity of alcohol in Leo's locker. More concerning, however, were considerable amounts of Adderall and OxyContin found across all three boys' lockers." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Alcohol was one thing, but prescription drugs? That was a whole new level of dangerous, a line that had been irrevocably crossed. "Has Sarah been notified?" he asked, his voice tight. "Yes, Mr. Miller," Principal Harrison confirmed, a note of resignation in his tone. "Mrs. Miller has already been informed. She's requested that we handle this internally, citing her employment at Westfield Academy and the potential impact on her career, as well as the boys' futures." He paused, then added, "I should also inform you that Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Thorne, Owen and Caleb's parents, have already contacted the school board. They're demanding a private meeting, suggesting the items were, in their words, planted to discredit their sons." So the familiar dance had begun again. Leo, Owen, and Caleb caught red-handed, and the powerful parents immediately spinning a narrative of victimhood and conspiracy. "And what about Leo?" Ethan asked, already knowing the answer. "He's been suspended, effective immediately," Principal Harrison stated. "This is a serious matter, Mr. Miller. While we want to handle this with discretion, the evidence is substantial. We will need to involve the police if these accusations of planting continue without basis. Ethan thanked the principal and hung up, his mind a whirlwind of anger and bitter recognition. Sarah had taught Leo that he could get away with anything. Now it seemed she was inadvertently teaching him to lie, to deny, to evade. The seed of impunity she had planted a week ago had already blossomed into something far more toxic. The get-out-of-jail-free card she'd pulled for shoplifting had emboldened Leo, leading him down a path of even greater risk. He found Sarah pacing anxiously in the living room, a stark contrast to her triumphant demeanor a week ago. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Ethan, did Principal Harrison call you?" she asked, her voice trembling. He simply nodded, crossing his arms. "This is a nightmare. They're trying to set the boys up, I just know it." "Set them up, Sarah?" Ethan asked, his voice devoid of emotion. "Or did they get caught?" No, Leo swears he had nothing to do with it," she insisted, her eyes wide with a desperate plea for him to believe her. "He said someone must have put those things in his locker." He sounded so convincing, Ethan. "You have to believe him." Ethan stared at her, a bitter laugh bubbling up in his throat. "Believe him? Sarah, a week ago he was caught on camera shoplifting almost $800 worth of merchandise. He tried to deny it then too, until the evidence was undeniable. And then you made it disappear. Why, after all of that, would I suddenly believe his claims of innocence now?" Sarah flinched, her desperation quickly morphing into anger. "Because he's my son, and you're supposed to be on our side. You're a detective, for God's sake. You know how to make things go away, how to find loopholes, how to protect people." Her voice rose with each word until she was practically shouting. The words hung in the air, cold and stark, stripping away all pretenses. The sudden, brutal clarity of her motive hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. "You know how to make things go away. This wasn't about love or partnership or building a family. This was about access. This was about his former badge, his connections, his perceived ability to manipulate the system." Sarah hadn't married him for him. She had married him for what he represented: a get-out-of-jail-free card for her son, a shield against the consequences of Leo's actions. He was a tool, a means to an end. The realization was sickening, a betrayal far deeper than any of Leo's transgressions. "That's not what my job is about, Sarah," Ethan said, his voice flat, his heart heavy with the crushing weight of this revelation. "And it's certainly not what I am about. My job was about justice. It was about upholding the law, not bending it for personal gain." Sarah threw her hands up in exasperation, her eyes flashing with fury. "Then what good are you?" she demanded, the question sharp, biting, and utterly damning. The coldness in his heart intensified. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time in their marriage, stripped of the illusion he had so desperately wanted to believe. He turned, the need to confront Leo, to understand the depth of his involvement, overwhelming him. He started for the stairs, but Sarah grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Wait, don't go up there yet," she pleaded, her voice suddenly softer, more manipulative. "I have a plan. We just need to handle this carefully." Ethan pulled his arm free, his gaze hard. "Another plan to make things disappear, Sarah? Another way to teach him that actions have no consequences? Look where that got us last time. Shoplifting escalated to this. What do you think happens next? What's the next gray area you'll navigate for him?" He shook his head, a sense of foreboding washing over him. "You're not just enabling him, Sarah. You're actively harming him. You're teaching him to be reckless, to be deceitful, to believe he's above it all. And it's only going to get worse." Sarah scoffed, her fear giving way to annoyance once more. "You're overreacting, Ethan. This is just a teenage mistake. Leo is not those other kids. He's a good boy at heart. We just need to protect him from the injustice of this system." She truly believed it, truly believed she was doing the right thing, truly believed she was the benevolent protector against a cruel world, rather than the architect of Leo's growing recklessness. The chasm between them had just become an abyss. Ethan didn't bother to reply to Sarah's last dismissal. The chilling clarity of her words, "Then what good are you?" still echoed in his mind, confirming his suspicions about her true motives. He pushed past her, the sheer force of his determination overriding her feeble attempt to block his path. He took the stairs two at a time, his anger a cold, hard knot in his stomach. He reached Leo's door and found it locked. He rapped sharply, "Leo, open this door. We need to talk." From inside, a muffled, defiant shout. "Go away! Mom said I don't have to talk to you. She's handling it." Ethan's jaw tightened. So Sarah had already been up here, poisoning the well, further isolating Leo from any attempt at genuine accountability. "Leo, listen to me," Ethan called through the door, his voice unwavering. "This isn't like the shoplifting. This time Mom's plan won't work. Possession of OxyContin is a felony, Leo, a serious felony." He heard a sharp intake of breath behind him. Sarah had followed him upstairs, her face pale with fury. "Ethan, leave him alone," she hissed, her voice a dangerous whisper. "I told you, I'm handling it. You're only making things worse." Ethan turned, his eyes blazing, the pain of her betrayal fueling his rage. "Making things worse? Sarah, you're teaching him to lie, to manipulate, to believe that rules don't apply to him. You're actively destroying him with your so-called protection." "I'm protecting him," Sarah insisted, stepping closer, her voice rising in desperation. "No," Ethan roared, losing the battle for control. "You're destroying him." The sudden intensity of their argument, the raw emotion in Ethan's voice, must have penetrated Leo's defiance. The door to Leo's room flew open, revealing the boy standing there, his face pale and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. He looked terrible, a stark contrast to the confident indifference he'd displayed just a week ago. "Stop it!" Leo yelled, his voice cracking. "Just stop fighting about me." Ethan's anger momentarily cooled, replaced by a sudden, sickening concern. He took a step towards Leo, his eyes scanning his stepson's face. The dilation of Leo's pupils, even in the dim light of the hallway, was unmistakable. "Leo," Ethan said, his voice dropping, "are you high right now?" Leo flinched, his eyes darting away. "No, of course not. What are you even talking about?" But his evasiveness, the slight tremor in his hands, betrayed his words. "What are you talking about, Leo?" Ethan pressed, refusing to let it go. "Tell me everything that happened. What were those drugs for? Were you taking them?" Leo let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "What does it matter? Mom already called Owen's dad. Senator Montgomery. He's going to make it all disappear. Just like last time." He looked at Ethan, a chillingly blank expression on his face, as if this was simply the natural order of things. Ethan turned to Sarah, disbelief etched across his face. "Senator Montgomery? You called Senator Montgomery? What did he say?" Sarah, though visibly shaken by Leo's appearance, still managed to meet his gaze with a defiant lift of her chin. "He's very understanding. He's going to speak with the school board, smooth things over. He's confident he can get the school to handle this without involving the police. For all three boys." She spoke as if securing the intervention of a U.S. senator for a drug possession charge was a minor inconvenience, easily overcome with the right connections. "And the drugs?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper, the implications horrifying. "What about the actual drugs, Sarah? How do you smooth over felony possession of OxyContin?" Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "They'll be disposed of, handled by school officials. No police involvement, no record for any of the boys." She said it with a chilling calmness, as if the illegal disposal of evidence was a perfectly acceptable solution. Ethan turned back to Leo, his gaze piercing. "Leo, tell me the truth. Were you just holding it for him, or were you involved in this in any other way? Do you know what those drugs are? Do you know how dangerous they are?" Leo shifted uncomfortably, his eyes still avoiding Ethan's. The defiant mask had slipped, revealing a flicker of guilt, a flicker of genuine fear. I was just holding it for Owen. He said he needed a safe place. Everyone knows his dad uses painkillers, so he can just get more from his house." He paused, then added, a bitter edge to his voice. "And Caleb's older brother deals. It's not a big deal, Ethan. Everyone does it." He shrugged, the gesture an attempt at casualness that failed miserably. "Right and wrong? What's the point? Owen's dad can just make it disappear." The defeat in Leo's voice, the utter cynicism of his worldview, hit Ethan with a profound sadness. Sarah's protection had not just shielded him from consequences. It had distorted his entire moral compass. It had taught him that justice was negotiable, that ethics were fluid, and that integrity was a fool's errand. He had learned that the only right was what you could get away with, and the only wrong was getting caught without the right connections. As Leo turned to retreat back into his room, Ethan moved to follow him, to try and break through the wall of cynicism and denial that Sarah had helped build around him. But Sarah stepped in front of him, physically blocking his path, her eyes blazing with an almost manic intensity. "That's enough, Ethan," she declared, her voice sharp and final. "You've done enough damage. Leave him alone. I will handle my son." Her body was a rigid barrier, protecting Leo not from the law, but from the truth, and from any chance of genuine reckoning or redemption. If you're finding this story as gripping as I lived it, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Sarah stood firm, her body a barricade in the narrow hallway, blocking Ethan from any further contact with Leo. "I will handle my son," she repeated, her voice dripping with finality. Ethan stared at her, the last vestiges of his hope for their marriage flickering and dying. "Your handling is what got us here, Sarah," he stated, his voice devoid of anger now, replaced by a profound weariness. "Your end justifies the means approach is teaching him to be a criminal. My values, what you call rigid and unrealistic, are about teaching him the difference between right and wrong. Your values are about protecting him from the consequences of wrongdoing, no matter the cost to his character." Sarah scoffed, a sneer twisting her lips. "Your police salary isn't going to get Leo into Harvard, Ethan. Senator Montgomery's influence, his connections, his wealth, that's what provides every advantage. That's the real world. That's what I'm securing for Leo." Her words were a chilling confession, laying bare the true motivations behind her actions, and indeed behind much of her life. It wasn't just about Leo's immediate comfort, it was about orchestrating a path of privilege, ensuring he never faced a true obstacle she couldn't remove. Ethan felt a cold dread settle in his chest. It wasn't just about protecting Leo from a bad choice, it was about ensuring he received every advantage, even if it meant sacrificing his moral compass on the altar of ambition and social climbing. She wanted a perfect future for Leo, meticulously crafted, devoid of struggle and utterly devoid of accountability. "Laws are for people who don't know any better," Sarah stated, her eyes hard, her voice laced with a condescension that made Ethan's skin crawl. The casual dismissal of the very foundation of societal order, spoken with such casual arrogance, was a window into a truly disturbing worldview. Ethan simply stared at her, finally seeing her not as the loving, supportive wife he had believed her to be, but as a woman driven by a profound, almost pathological need for control and status, willing to corrupt her own son in the process. The depth of her corruption, masked by her maternal protectiveness, was truly horrifying. He realized with a sickening clarity that he had been blind, utterly blind, to the woman he had married. "People who think they're above the rules, Sarah," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm, "eventually find out the hard way that gravity applies to everyone. They self-destruct, and they take everyone around them down with them." They stood at an impasse in the hallway, two figures carved from opposing ideologies, fundamentally divided on what constituted best for Leo. The space between them felt like a vast, unbridgeable canyon. "I won't let you ruin his life," Sarah declared, her voice trembling slightly, but her resolve unbroken. "And I won't help you ruin his character," Ethan countered, his own voice steady, uncompromising. He turned and slowly descended the stairs, each step a leaden weight, each creak of the wood a lament for a marriage crumbling. His mind raced, grappling with the impossible situation. Sarah had not only enabled Leo, but was now actively obstructing justice. She was facilitating the disposal of evidence, leveraging powerful connections to circumvent the law. His duty as a former officer, his ingrained sense of justice, screamed at him to act. But his duty as a husband, as a stepfather, the man who had pledged to build a family with Sarah, warred against it. Sarah followed him down, her footsteps light but purposeful. "What are you going to do?" she demanded, grabbing his arm again as he reached the living room. Her voice was laced with a desperate plea now. "Please, Ethan, don't betray your family. Don't betray us." He pulled his arm away. "Betray you, Sarah? Doing what's right for Leo is not a betrayal. It's the only way he stands a chance. Your honest way is a direct path to a life of moral compromise, where he believes he can always buy his way out of trouble." She scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Your integrity won't get him into Harvard, Ethan. It'll just land him in juvenile detention, or worse. Senator Montgomery's contacts, however, will ensure he gets into the best schools, clears his name, and has a future free of this ridiculous mistake. That's what I care about, not your archaic sense of justice." Her words solidified the chasm between them. It wasn't about right or wrong for her, but about achieving a specific, high-status outcome. Then her voice dropped, becoming a low, venomous threat. "So let me be perfectly clear. If you do anything at all, to jeopardize this arrangement, this solution that I have painstakingly put together for Leo, then we're done. This marriage, everything, it's over." Her eyes, cold and unwavering, left no doubt about her seriousness. Ethan looked at her, truly seeing the stark reality of her ultimatum. There was no room for compromise, no middle ground, no shared values. Their marriage, he realized, had been built on a foundation of sand, eroded by her ambition and his naive belief in their shared moral compass. The vows they had taken, the dreams they had spun, were meaningless in the face of her calculated pragmatism. The love he had felt for her, or perhaps for the idea of her, died a swift, painful death. He didn't respond to her threat. There was no point. He walked to the couch, picked up a blanket, and lay down, staring blankly at the ceiling. The marriage was over. It had been over for some time, perhaps even before it began, but only now had he finally painfully accepted the truth. Their values were irreconcilable, and he would not sacrifice his integrity for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a convenient asset to be leveraged. He spent the night on the couch, the silence of the house screaming the truth of their fractured life. The following morning, the unspoken words of the night before hung heavy in the air. Sarah found Ethan in the kitchen, packing a small bag with essentials. He hadn't slept. The fight with Sarah, the truth of her motives, and the crushing realization about their marriage having kept him awake. "I'm moving out, Sarah," he said, his voice calm, resolute. "I can't be part of this. I can't stand by and watch you teach Leo that he's above the law." She gasped, her face twisting in accusation. "You're abandoning us? Just like that, when Leo needs us most?" Her tone was incredulous, laced with a familiar, manipulative edge. "No, Sarah," Ethan clarified, looking directly into her eyes. "I'm not abandoning Leo. I'm refusing to participate in wrongdoing. I'm refusing to compromise my values, and more importantly, his future." Her gaze softened, a hint of genuine worry flickering through her anger. "What about Leo? What will you do about him?" "I will always be here for him, Sarah. If he ever needs me, if he ever truly wants to talk, I'll answer that call. But my influence, my principles, they're clearly not welcome in this house, and they're certainly not welcome by you." As he spoke, a deeper understanding of Sarah's motivations settled over Ethan. He knew of her own difficult past, a childhood marked by scarcity and missed opportunities. He understood that her fervent desire to give Leo every advantage was rooted in her own deprivation, a desperate attempt to shield him from the struggles she had endured. But in her relentless pursuit of this protection, she was inadvertently teaching him the most destructive lesson of all. He tried one last time. "Sarah, you're trying to give him everything you never had. But character, integrity, self-respect, those things matter more than possessions or connections. They last longer. They make a man." She merely scoffed, turning away from him. "You and your morals, Ethan, they belong in your old police precinct, not in the real world." She was unreachable, encased in her own logic, her own version of reality. He finished packing the small bag, a profound sense of loss mingling with relief. As he walked towards the door, Sarah's voice, cold and sharp, cut through the silence. "If you walk out that door, Ethan, don't bother coming back. It will be over. For good. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. He turned, looking at her one last time, his heart heavy. Sarah, he said, using a different name by mistake, one he'd used in a past memory. You're teaching him the worst thing. Impunity. Then he walked out, closing the door softly behind him, severing the last fragile thread of their shared life. Ethan found a small, sparsely furnished apartment on the other side of town. The silence there was different, a quiet solitude rather than the strained tension of his former home. He also transferred from the main detective bureau to the juvenile division, a move that felt both necessary and symbolic. He needed a fresh start, a new focus, and perhaps a way to still make a difference in young lives, even if he couldn't in Leo's. True to her words, Sarah filed for divorce a few weeks later. Ethan didn't contest it. The marriage was irrevocably broken, and he saw no point in prolonging the agony. His only request, conveyed through their respective lawyers, was to maintain a relationship with Leo. That proved to be a harder battle. Initially, Leo refused contact, influenced, Ethan suspected, by Sarah's narrative of him as the rigid moralist, the man who had abandoned them in their time of need. Text messages went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. It hurt deeply, but Ethan understood. Leo was still caught in his mother's orbit, still believing in her version of protection. His new work in juvenile detention was eye-opening. He saw firsthand the devastating consequences of young lives gone astray, often due to a lack of guidance, a lack of boundaries, or a misguided sense of invincibility. It reignited a spark in him, a desire to prevent others from falling into the same traps. He began developing a mentoring program, one he called Second Chance, aimed at providing at-risk youth with positive role models and a clear understanding of consequences, responsibility, and empathy. Meanwhile, Sarah, with Senator Montgomery's formidable influence, lived up to her promise. Leo's school records remained pristine. The drug incident at Westfield Academy had indeed simply disappeared, swallowed by the powerful machinery of privilege and connections. There were no police reports, no formal charges, no black marks on Leo's burgeoning academic career. 6 months passed, a quiet, melancholic blur. Ethan settled into his new routine, finding a quiet satisfaction in his work and the beginnings of his program. Then, one evening, his phone rang. It was Lieutenant Miller, his old colleague, his voice heavy with a familiar weariness. "Ethan," Miller began, "I just wanted to give you a heads up. Leo was picked up tonight." Ethan's heart lurched. "What happened?" "Drunk driving," Miller said, his tone grim. "Hit a mailbox, swerved off the road. Luckily, no one was hurt, but he was well over the limit." "And?" Ethan prompted, bracing himself. He knew what was coming. Miller sighed. "Sarah called. She was frantic, and, well, for old time's sake, in considering who his mother is, I let him go with a warning. Just a warning, no charges." He paused, then added, "She promised to keep him grounded, said he'd learn his lesson." A cold wave of despair washed over Ethan. "A warning," he repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The cycle continued, unbroken. "Look, Ethan," Miller said, "I know you disagree with this, but you know how it is. Politics, connections. It happens." "I know, Miller," Ethan replied, his voice flat. "Thanks for the call." He hung up, the weight of this new transgression and its subsequent nullification settling heavily on his soul. This time, he didn't wait for Leo to call. He sent a text, simple and direct. "Leo, call me. We need to talk. No judgments, just talk." He wasn't sure if he'd get a response, but to his surprise, an hour later, his phone buzzed. A text from Leo. "Okay, meet me at the diner by the park tomorrow after school." The next day, Ethan arrived at the diner early. When Leo walked in, Ethan barely recognized him. He was thinner. His eyes seemed to carry a haunted quality, and he had an almost imperceptible jitteriness about him, a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. The casual arrogance was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that tugged at Ethan's heart. Leo looked up at Ethan. His eyes, usually so guarded, now held a raw vulnerability that twisted Ethan's gut. The usual bravado, the casual indifference, was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. They sat in the corner booth of the diner, The clatter of plates and muffled conversations, a stark contrast to the heavy silence between them. I don't know, Leo finally mumbled, picking at a loose thread on the tablecloth. It's just easier to not care, to not try. If I'm drunk, if I'm acting out, then it's just whatever. His voice trailed off, a hint of self-loathing in his tone. Ethan reached across the table, placing his hand over Leo's, a gesture of comfort and connection he hadn't offered in months. Leo, I never expected you to screw up, he said, his voice gentle but firm. I expected you to learn, to face consequences, to grow into the good man I know you can be. That's why I left. Not because I abandoned you, but because I couldn't be part of a system that taught you the opposite. I couldn't stand by and watch your mom throw you to the wolves by teaching you that rules don't apply to you. Leo looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Owen and Caleb think it's hilarious, he confided, his voice barely above a whisper. All of it. How we got away with the shoplifting. How the school thing just disappeared. They're already talking about more stuff, bigger stuff. They said we're untouchable. He shuddered, a tremor passing through his thin frame. Ethan's heart pounded with a renewed sense of urgency. Leo, listen to me very carefully, he said, squeezing Leo's hand. Owen and Caleb are not your friends. They're using you. They're feeding into your worst impulses, and they'll drop you the second things get too hot. They care about themselves and their ability to get away with things, not you. Leo pulled his hand away, running it through his messy hair. So what's the point then? Is my life already ruined? I mean, with all the stuff that happened, even if it disappeared. His voice was choked with despair. Ethan leaned forward, his eyes earnest. No, Leo, your life is absolutely not ruined. You're young and you have a chance to turn things around. That's what second chance is all about. It's about taking responsibility, learning from mistakes, and building a better future, one choice at a time. He spoke passionately about his new program, the importance of mentorship, and the power of self-respect. Their conversation stretched for nearly 2 hours, a fragile thread connecting them across the chasm that had formed. A small crack had appeared in the wall Leo had built around himself, a glimmer of hope. He agreed to meet again, to talk more about second chance, but the glimmer was fleeting. Subsequent meetings were postponed, then canceled, Leo always citing, something came up, or mom needs me. Ethan knew Sarah's influence was still too strong, pulling him back into the comforting, yet ultimately destructive embrace of impunity. Life moved on. Ethan poured his energy into Second Chance. His dedication paid off and the program gained city funding, securing a dedicated space and expanding its reach. He started making a real difference in the lives of other young people, a quiet satisfaction in his heart, even as the shadow of Leo lingered. Meanwhile, news of Leo filtered through mutual acquaintances. His grades plummeted. His behavior at school worsened. He was 17 now, almost 18, an age where the consequences of his actions would become far more severe. The warnings Ethan had given Sarah echoed ominously in his mind. Then one cold autumn evening, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Boston General Hospital. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over him. He answered, his voice tight. Mr. Miller? A nurse's voice asked, brisk and professional. This is Nurse Kim from the emergency department. We have a Leo Miller here. He's been admitted for an overdose. The world spun. An overdose? Of what? OxyContin and alcohol, Nurse Kim stated, the clinical detachment in her voice doing little to lessen the horror. He's stable now, but he was critical. We've tried to reach his mother, but her phone is going straight to voicemail. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his keys, the words ringing in his ears, and raced to the hospital. He found Leo in a sterile white room, hooked up to an IV, his face pale and drawn, his breathing shallow. He looked small, vulnerable, stripped of all pretense. The sight tore at Ethan's heart. Leo, Ethan whispered, pulling a chair close to the bed. Leo's eyes fluttered open, hazy with residual medication. He recognized Ethan and, surprisingly, there was no resentment, only a profound weariness. Ethan, he rasped, his voice weak. It wasn't an accident, was it? Ethan asked, his voice gentle. Leo slowly shook his head. I just lost count. Of the pills. It got hard to feel anything else. He paused, then added, his voice barely audible. It all started since you left. Owen and Caleb, they just kept pushing. Said it was fine, said nothing would happen. He let out a dry, bitter laugh. They dumped me at the emergency entrance when I started puking. Said they didn't want to get involved. Just then, the door burst open. Sarah stood there, disheveled, her face a mask of panic and fury. She must have seen Ethan's car, or perhaps a mutual acquaintance finally reached her. She stormed in, ignoring Ethan completely, her gaze fixed on Leo. Leo, what happened? Are you all right? Why didn't anyone call me? Her questions were a torrent, laced with accusation. She didn't wait for answers. Her eyes, still filled with panic, darted to Ethan. What are you doing here? She demanded, her voice shrill. This is all your fault. You abandoned us. You left him. Before Ethan could respond, Sarah was already minimizing the severity of the situation, her mind clearly shifting into crisis management mode. This is just a mistake, a teenage phase, she declared, her voice regaining a semblance of control. We just need to get him into a discreet treatment facility, away from here. No one needs to know about this. The familiar refrain of discreet and no one needs to know was sickeningly predictable. Ethan stood up, his gaze firm, his voice cutting through her frantic plans. Sarah, stop it, he commanded, his voice sharp enough to momentarily silence her. He almost died. This isn't about discretion or reputation anymore. This is about his life, your enabling, your constant efforts to make his problems disappear. They led him right here. He gestured to Leo, pale and frail in the hospital bed, a stark testament to the consequences of her protection. Ethan stood over Leo's bed, his gaze fixed on Sarah. Do you see this, Sarah? He demanded, his voice low but cutting. This is OxyContin, the same drug he got away with 2 years ago because you handled it, because you made it disappear. Look at him. This is where making things disappear leads. He gestured towards the pale, fragile figure of Leo, Sarah's face contorted with fury. Get out. Yeah, she shrieked, her voice raw with panic and guilt. Get out, Ethan. This is all your fault. You abandoned him. You abandoned us. I offered him real help, Sarah, Ethan countered, trying to keep his voice calm. My second chance program, a place where he could learn responsibility, where he could face his issues head on. Your program is for criminals, Ethan, she spat, her eyes flashing with disdain. Leo is not a criminal. He's a good boy who made a mistake. Suddenly, a weak voice cut through their argument. Stop it! Both of you, just stop fighting about me. Leo's eyes, though still clouded, held a newfound clarity, a desperate plea for an end to the charade. I'm sick of being the rope in your tug-of-war. He pushed himself up, wincing from the pain. He looked at his mother, a profound sadness in his eyes. You don't care about me, Mom. Not really. You care about your image, your reputation, what people think.